Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
The message came in at 12:04 in the morning, which should have been my first sign that this wasn't just bad, it was personal. You don't fire someone via text at midnight unless you're either a coward or trying to send a message. Maybe both. I'd just finished brushing my teeth, still half damp from the shower, when my phone buzzed. Thought it might be my daughter, maybe a weather alert, something mundane. But there it was, lit up in the middle of my dark bedroom like a slap across the face. "Hey Tom, the board's decided to make a change. We're letting you go. Too much dead weight. Appreciate everything. Carl." No punctuation at the end, no call, no explanation, just a gut punch dressed up as a late-night text from a guy who used to buy me beers at happy hour. I sat down on the edge of my bed, still holding the phone like it might change its mind. My wife, Claire, rolled over, squinting in the dark. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said automatically, but my voice was flat. She didn't press, just turned back around, and I sat there in silence, rereading that single line. Dead weight. That's what I was now. Dead weight. Now, here's the part that might surprise you. I didn't reply. Didn't scream. Didn't throw the phone. Didn't start crafting some indignant manifesto. I just stood up, walked quietly into my home office, and opened my old laptop, the one they didn't know I still had access to. And there it was, right where I'd left it, tucked away in a folder named Personal. The file was called carlmessfinal.pdf. It had been sitting there for almost 3 years, not out of spite at first, just insurance, documentation, protection. But now it was something else entirely. I uploaded it to the company's anonymous ethics inbox, copied the board distribution list, and hit send. Then I shut the laptop, turned off the light, and went back to bed. You might think I'm some kind of corporate saboteur. I'm not. I was a guy who gave 20 years to a company that stopped seeing me the moment I stopped being shiny. But I wasn't always invisible. I started at Langston Strategic the year my daughter was born, 1999. They still gave out paper pay stubs back then. I helped build that company's first project pipeline, hired half the senior analysts they now pretend fell from the sky. I bled for them. I missed anniversaries, ball games, family funerals. "Just one more quarter, Tom. We need you on this, Tom." And I always said yes. Always. Then 5 years ago, Carl Monahan showed up. Mid-30s, teeth too white, hair too perfect. Wore sneakers with suits like he was on Shark Tank. Called everyone buddy, even if he didn't know your name. He wasn't a bad guy at first, just full of himself. I actually trained him, sat down with him over coffee, explained how we run large-scale procurement models, walked him through our vendor relationships, our client metrics, our risk matrices. He nodded, took notes, thanked me. 2 months later, he gave a presentation to the board using my entire slide deck. My name never came up. I should have said something then, but I didn't. I told myself he was new, that maybe he just forgot. I let it go. That was the first domino. Over the next couple of years, I started to notice things. Little things like being left off meeting invites or being looped in after the fact. Then came the real cuts. Project leads reassigned to fresh talent. Strategy calls I used to chair now run by guys who still needed me to explain what a blended margin was. My office moved, smaller, darker. Brett, a kid with more hair product than sense, became my collaborator. I'd built a model that saved the company $600,000 over 5 years. Brett put a new logo on it and presented it to the CFO. Carl started using phrases like, "You've got a lot of legacy knowledge, Tom," and "we're evolving the culture." That's corporate speak for "you don't fit anymore." One day he told me, "You're great at what you do, but I need people who can scale faster." What the hell does that even mean? So I started documenting, not for revenge, not yet, just in case. Every shady invoice, every forwarded confidential email, every expense report that didn't add up. I kept it all. I didn't even know what I was going to do with it. Just knew it felt like I was slowly being buried, and someday I'd need proof I was alive. And then came the text, the final insult, fired after midnight, via message, like I was a bad date instead of a man who'd given up half his life for their bottom line. Let me ask you something. What would you do if your boss stabbed you in the back like this? Not just once, but slow and methodical, year after year, until the only thing left of you in that building was your name on an old conference room booking? Would you take it? Would you walk away quietly? Or would you do what I did, light the match and walk away without looking back? Because I didn't plan revenge, I didn't fantasize about payback. But when the moment came, when Carl showed me exactly how little I mattered, I answered the only way I knew how, with the truth. All of it. In one tidy, damning PDF. And the next morning, Langston Strategic's board called an emergency meeting. Long before the midnight text, before the polite betrayals and the hollow handshakes, before the carefully phrased emails that felt like paper cuts to the soul, there was a time when I actually believed I was indispensable. That's the word they used back then. Indispensable. 20 years of loyalty builds that illusion, like brick on brick. I was the guy you called when the project slipped off the rails, when the client started asking questions no one had answers for, when the new hires panicked at the first sign of conflict. I wasn't flashy. I didn't have a personal brand or a TED Talk, but I had grit, memory, and a goddamn Rolodex of solutions that only came from screwing up so many times you knew every trap before the rookie even saw the edge. That version of me? He didn't know he was already fading. The first crack came the year they remodeled the office. It sounds petty, doesn't it? Chairs, desks, color schemes. But look closer and you'll see the truth. Offices don't change because someone wants better lighting. They change because someone wants a new culture. And culture's just code for who matters now and who doesn't. My window office with the broken blinds became a standing desk in the innovation bullpen. No more privacy, no more quiet. Just a sea of headphones and fast-talking consultants in their late 20s pounding away on MacBooks. I adapted, or at least I tried, but every day felt a little more foreign, a little less mine. Carl started rising around then, not because he was brilliant. He wasn't. He was fast, loud, and knew how to talk to people who wore $1,000 shoes. He didn't care about systems or legacy processes. He cared about optics. He played golf, bought the latest phone every 6 months, and used words like synergize and scalable without irony. While I was working late fixing broken procurement workflows, he was out grabbing drinks with the CFO, laughing about how outdated our invoicing system was. I taught that man everything I could. He used it all to paint me as obsolete. They brought in Brett next. Fresh MBA, shiny resume, wore suits that fit too well, and smiled like a campaign ad. I was told he'd be my partner on a new restructuring initiative. Funny though, he never took notes, barely showed up to working sessions, but somehow his name ended up on the slide deck I wrote from scratch. When I brought it up to Carl, he patted me on the back and told me, "Don't worry, Tom, everyone knows who the real workhorses are." That was his way of saying, "Shut up and take it." And I did, at first, but things started stacking up, small humiliations. Missed invites to meetings I used to run. My budget request got rejected without explanation. Junior analysts began reaching out to Brett for decisions I should have been looped in on. I found myself out of the loop more often than not, and when I asked about it, I'd get vague assurances like, "We're trying to be more agile," or we're streamlining the org, which meant I was no longer necessary, just not yet gone. Claire started noticing. She asked if something was wrong, if maybe I should take some time off. I lied, told her things were just shifting, that the company was changing and I was adapting. Truth was, I was terrified. Not of being fired, I was terrified of being forgotten, of going from a guy with answers to a guy who just remembered when things used to work. I wasn't trying to be a hero, I just didn't know who I was without this job. That's when I started keeping the file. It wasn't revenge at that point, it was survival. a breadcrumb trail of every instance where I felt erased, emails where my work was copied and repurposed, screenshots of Slack conversations where Carl mocked my my old school approach, spreadsheets showing cost overruns he buried in summaries to keep his pitch looking clean. At night, I'd come home, crack a beer, and quietly document it all, just in case, just so I could one day prove I wasn't crazy. Then came the reorg. Carl presented it as a strategic pivot. We're aligning core talent with future objectives, he said, standing in front of a screen filled with arrows and buzzwords. But I knew what it meant. It meant people like me were on the wrong side of the arrow. Within 3 months, 5 of my colleagues over the age of 50 were either reassigned or nudged out. All of them were seasoned, steady, unglamorous, and all of them were replaced by shiny, new faces who could talk fast and dress well. I stayed, not because I felt safe, but because I wasn't done watching. Then, one afternoon, Brett gave a presentation to the board outlining a new vendor cost-saving strategy. It was detailed, smart, efficient. It was also mine, lifted directly from a confidential internal report I had written 2 years earlier. I sat in the back, unnoticed, watching him soak in praise he didn't earn. Carl leaned back in his chair, like a proud mentor, nodding. I didn't say a word. I just added the slides to the file. I used to think loyalty meant something. That if you showed up, worked hard, did your part, the company would protect you. But that's not how it works anymore. Loyalty isn't rewarded, it's exploited. You give 20 years. They give you a text message. You bleed for them. They call you dead weight. I wasn't angry. Not yet. That came later. What I felt was a kind of quiet, simmering grief, like mourning someone who hadn't died, but was already fading from the pictures. I started looking at the younger guys in the office, like they were already packing the dirt on my grave. They smiled and asked for advice, not because they needed it, but because it was expected. A courtesy, like visiting a museum. I became history, and no one says goodbye to history. They just stop reading. So I kept my head down. I did the work. I smiled when I needed to. But behind that, every move they made was being recorded. Not out of malice, but because I finally understood the rules. In this place, you don't get remembered for what you built. You get remembered for what you leave behind when they try to erase you. And I had no intention of disappearing quietly. There's something uniquely humiliating about being treated like furniture in a building you helped construct. One day, you're holding meetings in the main conference room, presenting to clients who shake your hand and ask your opinion with real interest. And the next, you're standing outside that same glass wall while some intern you barely trained stumbles through the very pitch you wrote, mispronouncing half the terms like he skimmed a Wikipedia article 5 minutes before. And the worst part, no one even looks at you. Not to ignore you, not deliberately, but because you're not even on their radar. You've become the guy who gets copied on emails no one reads and left out of the ones that actually matter. It didn't happen overnight, but one day I looked around and realized I was invisible. The performance review that started it came wrapped in soft language. It wasn't hostile, not on the surface. Carl sat across from me in that too bright HR conference room, the one with the inspirational quotes framed on the wall and the fake ficus in the corner, and told me that this was just a touch point. That's what he called it, a touch point. Like we were realigning the gears in a machine, not gutting a man's career. He said I had a strong foundation, but struggled to adapt to evolving workflows. He said I wasn't contributing at scale. He used phrases that meant nothing but felt sharp anyway. I sat there, pen in hand, writing nothing, and listening to a man I once helped promote explain to me that I was effectively falling behind. Now, if I'd been coasting, if I'd been clocking out early and mailing it in for years, maybe I could have swallowed it. Maybe I could have taken the critique and changed something. But I wasn't phoning it in. I was still coming in early, still cleaning up after Brett's half-finished models, still smoothing over client concerns, still remembering the names of people's spouses when the new blood barely remembered anyone's job title. I was still carrying weight, but no one saw it because Carl had already rewritten the story. The moment I realized how deep it went was the morning I was locked out of a project drive I'd been managing for 6 months. No warning, no explanation, just gone. I asked Itai, who kicked it to operations, who claimed it was part of a restructuring. Later, I overheard Brett tell another analyst that I'd been off-boarded from active ops. Off-boarded, like a package being rerouted. I checked the system logs later that week, just out of spite, and saw that Carl had removed my admin privileges himself. That's when the file started getting serious. I wasn't just logging suspicious invoices or one-off slights anymore. I was digging. I started cross-referencing timelines, matching up Brett's so-called original presentations with old drafts I still had stored in my private drive. I printed out receipts, highlighted inconsistencies. Every time Carl opened his mouth at a meeting and said, "As our new framework shows," I was scanning the room to see who remembered that the new framework was just the Q3 playbook I'd refined 2 years ago. No one blinked. I found the email trail by accident. One of the interns had sent over the wrong thread when forwarding me vendor documents. Buried halfway down was a line from Carl to Brett. "Make sure Data Tom's looped out. He gets twitchy when we borrow too heavily." I read it twice before the weight of it hit me. It wasn't just neglect, it was orchestration. I wasn't being forgotten. I was being erased, one step at a time. That week, I was put on a performance improvement plan. It came as a development opportunity, of course. They always spin it that way. Carl said it was just a formality. Not a punishment, Tom, just a way to get back on track. Like I was the one who'd lost the plot. Like I hadn't spent the last 6 months holding together a client portfolio that would have collapsed if I hadn't caught 3 different billing errors that Brett couldn't even see on a spreadsheet. I signed the damn thing. What else could I do? I had a mortgage, a daughter in college, and 20 years of reputation in a company that was suddenly acting like I had wandered in from the street and asked for a desk. Signing it felt like digging my own grave, but at least I could control the pace. After that, people started looking at me differently, not with malice, just a quiet discomfort. Like I was the guy you didn't want to sit next to in the lunchroom in case whatever I had might rub off. I became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happened when you stopped being shiny, when you didn't speak in buzzwords or brag about your morning cold plunge. I started getting questions like, "How are things going?" in tones that were too careful, too rehearsed. Everyone saw the writing on the wall, but no one wanted to say it out loud. At home, I told Claire things were fine. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. She just brought me an extra coffee in the mornings and made dinner without asking if I'd be late. I caught her checking the bank account more often, though. I started sleeping less, waking up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how easy it is for people to vanish. I'd spent 2 decades building something, and somehow it was all being rewritten like I'd never been there. And then came the final insult. One Friday afternoon, after most people had cleared out early for some company culture hour, I sat at my desk going over a vendor reconciliation spreadsheet when I heard clapping from the executive floor. Carl and Brett were hosting a private session with the board, showcasing a new cost optimization initiative. I already knew what it was. I'd spent months building it. I'd refined the model during weekends, stitched it together from years of vendor data, and now there it was, projected on a screen with Brett's name at the top. I stood in the hallway, just outside the glass, watching them talk through my work like it had fallen from the sky into their perfectly manicured hands. Carl cracked a joke. Laughter. The board nodded. Brett beamed. I stood there for 10 minutes and not one person acknowledged me. I didn't interrupt. I didn't storm in. I just turned around, walked back to my desk, and added the final slides to the file. That was the moment something shifted. I stopped mourning what was being taken from me. I stopped trying to save the scraps of a reputation they'd already decided to bury. I stopped being afraid. Because if they were going to pretend I never mattered, then it was time to show them what they'd tried to bury. And I wasn't done yet. For a long time, I told myself that keeping the file was just a matter of self-preservation. It was my parachute, my insurance, the silent witness that would confirm I hadn't imagined the slow unraveling of my place at Langston Strategic. At first, it was small, a folder on a backup drive with a few saved emails, some expense reports that didn't quite add up, notes jotted on a yellow legal pad with dates and initials that probably didn't mean much to anyone else. But as the months dragged on and the smirks became colder, the exclusions more obvious, and the meetings more pointedly not sent to my inbox, that folder started to grow. And it didn't stop growing. By the time I hit send on that final version, the one labeled Carl Mess, final.pdf, it had transformed into something else entirely. It wasn't a collection of grievances. It wasn't even about me anymore. It was evidence. It was a timeline, a roadmap of ethical rot compiled with the precision of a man who had nothing left to lose and too much memory to let things slide. I didn't collect dirt out of malice. I collected it because when you work somewhere for 2 decades, you see the cracks that no one talks about. And when those cracks start turning into sinkholes, you either fall in with everyone else or you start building your escape hatch. The first piece that went into the file wasn't even intentional. It was an invoice from a vendor Carl had pushed through shortly after his promotion. It didn't smell right. New supplier, inflated line items, and a consulting fee that looked suspiciously like a kickback. I remember asking Carl about it in the hallway. Just a quiet, professional question. Hey, are we really comfortable with a 30% markup from a first-time vendor? He looked at me like I'd asked him to confess to murder and said, "Don't worry about that one, Tom. It's handled." That phrase stuck with me. It's handled. That's what people say when they don't want you looking any closer. So I looked closer. I started tracking the invoices that came through Carl's direct approvals. I noticed a pattern. The same 3 vendors, all newer accounts, all connected to consultants who had LinkedIn profiles that looked hastily built and suspiciously light on credentials. One of them listed Carl as a mentor. Another turned out to be his old fraternity brother. I didn't say anything. I just saved everything. Then there were the internal memos, phrased innocently enough, but when lined up over time, you could see the strategy. Downsizing of legacy staff, reallocation of budget toward strategic innovation, priority access given to teams aligned with forward-thinking leadership. All coded language, all part of the same playbook. Remove the old, bring in the loyal, restructure the narrative. I found the draft of a speech Carl gave to the board during a closed-door session, one that never made it into public company records. It included the phrase, "Our next phase requires cutting institutional fat." He was talking about people like me, people who had built the institution to begin with. I started recording meetings, not because I wanted drama, but because I stopped trusting the words that came out of Carl's mouth. I had recordings of him contradicting himself in the span of 3 days, telling me one thing privately, then spinning an entirely different story to the executive team. In one especially painful clip, I asked him during a one-on-one whether I could support the upcoming audit presentation, and he responded, "Honestly, Tom, I think you'd confuse the messaging." I smiled at the time, said I understood, but that recording found its place in the file, under a section I labeled Strategic Disempowerment. But the most damning piece wasn't a spreadsheet, a memo, or even a falsified budget. It was a video, one that almost didn't exist. It was from a leadership retreat 2 years ago, the kind with breakout sessions and forced team-building exercises that nobody ever enjoyed. Late one night, someone, probably Brett, had pulled out their phone during a round of drinks by the hotel bar and caught Carl in full swagger. He was drunk, loose-tongued, trying to impress a younger team from marketing. He leaned over the table, laughing too loudly, and said, "You want to get ahead in this place? You got to make the dinosaurs look confused. Once people think they're slowing down, it's open season." That video didn't just prove his attitude, it proved intent. You could hear the derision in his voice, the satisfaction. He wasn't just letting the old guard fade. He was actively orchestrating their fall. When I first watched that clip, alone in my home office late one night, I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. This wasn't personal in the way I thought. It wasn't about me. It was about the plan. Carl had built a path upward, and anything that reminded him he hadn't earned it the hard way, anything that smelled like experience, humility, or inconvenient memory, was simply in the way. So I compiled everything. I triple-checked the timelines, cross-referenced the emails, formatted it all into a single, brutal narrative. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. I labeled every section clearly, included an index, added relevant appendices. I knew the board wouldn't read everything, but I also knew exactly where to plant the seeds, where to point their eyes. I ended the document with a short note, unsigned and formal. This file contains materials relevant to current and future ethical oversight. Patterns suggest financial misrepresentation, abuse of authority, and coordinated efforts to undermine regulatory reporting. Please advise. I uploaded it using the secure whistleblower submission system that had been collecting dust on the company portal for years. It was designed to handle things like discrimination complaints and mild HR violations. It had never seen anything like this. I sent blind copies to 2 board members I trusted, one of whom I hadn't spoken to in over a year, but who once told me I was the moral compass of the ops division. I figured he'd want to know how far off the needle had drifted. When I shut the laptop that night, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel vindication. What I felt was a strange kind of sorrow, like saying goodbye to something you loved even after it stopped loving you back. I wasn't naive enough to think the fallout would be clean or that justice would roll in like a parade. I just knew that silence wasn't an option anymore, because when someone rewrites the story to erase you, you either fade or you fight. And I had chosen to fight with the one thing they couldn't twist, the truth. The email from the board's administrative office landed in my inbox before sunrise the next morning, time-stamped at 5:48 a.m., marked high priority, requesting my immediate availability for a confidential discussion. There was no greeting, no fluff, just a line that made it clear something had shifted, something significant enough to wake corporate directors from their usual cushioned slumber. I didn't reply right away. I sat in my kitchen with a mug of black coffee, staring at that message, letting it soak in. Not with excitement or dread, but with a kind of quiet finality, like a man watching the tide rise around a building he once helped construct, knowing full well it wouldn't stand the flood. I didn't go into the office that day. I didn't dress for war. I didn't even shave. Instead, I let the storm brew behind closed doors. Around 10 a.m., I started getting messages, pings from colleagues who had spent the past 6 months pretending I didn't exist. One text simply said, "What did you do?" Another, from an old analyst I trained years ago, said, "It's chaos upstairs. Carl's office door hasn't opened in an hour. Brett looks like he's seen a ghost." The phrase made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because in that building, I had already been turned into a ghost long before they realized I was still watching. By lunchtime, the internal communications platform was lit up with cryptic messages. A mandatory meeting had been scheduled for all department heads. HR was pulling historical documentation on vendor contracts. The finance team was rerunning Q3 audits with fresh eyes, whatever that meant. The real confirmation came around 2:30 in the afternoon when Carl's name vanished from the executive contact list. Just like that. Gone. No goodbye, no transition memo, no slick farewell video filled with platitudes about new adventures. Just digital erasure, the same kind he'd spent years orchestrating against people like me. Fitting in its own cruel way. Later that evening, I received a formal message from HR requesting a Zoom call. They couched it in the usual legal language, an opportunity to align expectations, review next steps, explore potential resolutions. I knew what they wanted. They wanted quiet. They wanted me to sign something, an NDA, a release form, a clean little bow to tie off the mess I had exposed. I didn't join the call. I didn't answer their follow-up messages. They could wait. For once I had the leverage, and I intended to sit with it for a while. Claire came home just after 6. She had that look on her face, the one where she wanted to ask everything, but didn't know where to start. I told her what happened, more or less. She sat down across from me, hands wrapped around her tea, and said the one thing I hadn't expected. "Are you okay?" Not, "Are we okay?" or "What now?" Just that, soft and simple, like she understood something had been taken from me that no amount of vindication could replace. Because here's the truth. Winning, if you can even call it that, doesn't feel like it's supposed to. There's no swelling music, no applause, no final frame where the camera pans out over a better tomorrow. There's just silence, relief, maybe, and a hollow space where the fight used to be. I didn't get my job back. I didn't want it anymore. What I had built was gone, not just in title or task, but in trust. You can't walk back into a building you just set fire to and ask for your old desk, even if you had every reason to strike the match. Over the next few days, a few people reached out, some with congratulations disguised as curiosity, others with apologies too late to matter. One former colleague, a woman I hadn't spoken to since our third reorg, called and said, "You did what the rest of us were too scared to even think about." She thanked me, then she hung up. I didn't hear from her again. The severance package came in the mail the following week, a neatly written offer, generous in financial terms, contingent upon a non-disclosure agreement, and a statement affirming that I had not and would not pursue any further claims. I read it 3 times, not because I was undecided, but because I wanted to feel the weight of it. The company's attempt to buy silence with a smile. I didn't sign it. I left it on the table, folded but unclaimed. One morning, I walked into the garage, dusted off the old Langston Strategic coffee mug I used to keep on my desk, and stared at it like it belonged to another life. I thought about tossing it, but something stopped me. Not nostalgia, something colder, more rooted. Maybe it was the reminder that for 2 decades, I gave everything I had to a place that ultimately decided I wasn't worth a conversation before cutting me loose. Or maybe I kept it because even broken things deserve to be seen. People ask if I regret it, if I'd do it differently, if I think Carl deserved what happened to him. I always answer the same way. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because there comes a point when staying silent means agreeing with your own erasure. When the people in charge forget that your name has weight, that your history isn't a liability, but a ledger they've been drawing from without acknowledgement. Maybe Carl thought he was untouchable. Maybe Brett thought the future belonged to people who moved fast and talked louder than everyone else. Maybe they were right for a while, but eventually the truth catches up. Now I spend more time with my daughter. I walk the dog longer. I sit on the porch and let the quiet settle in, not because I'm done, but because I'm finally choosing what comes next. I'm not a hero. I'm not a martyr. I'm just a man who got tired of being erased and chose, in the end, to be seen, fully, finally, and without apology. Some people will say I went too far. Others will say I didn't go far enough. I'll let them argue about that. Me? I sleep just fine.